For those of you that don't know me, my name's Mark Cameron. I'm the Chief Executive of the 5% Club, and it's a real delight to have so many of you join us this morning, looking at how we can support apprentices end to end and create that high quality learning journey. Clearly, there's an issue around that, and there's a lot of negativity around apprenticeships and completion rates, and hopefully we'll unpack that. And we've got a fantastic panel of speakers this morning, each with their own various experiences to bring to bear. We've got Emily from St Martin's Group this morning, but many will also know Emily is the Chief Executive of the Association of Apprentices. So Emily's here in her St Martin's Group guys this morning, but actually she's got a wealth of experience from Association of Apprentices. We've got our colleagues, our partners for this event from City and Guilds, Rebecca and Jamie, who will talk through the aspects there from an endpoint assessment perspective. And we've got Dr Jacqueline Hall from BAE Systems, who will actually talk us through a case study on how this works. So welcome to the event, the 5% Club. Who are the 5% Club? For those of you who don't know us, we're not an elite organisation. A 5% Club does sound quite elite, but actually we exist as a charity to encourage positive employer action for increased, inclusive and accessible workplace learning for all. So we do focus quite a bit on apprenticeships, but actually we also cover graduate schemes and we cover sponsored students. We're a charity. Membership of the 5% Club is free. And as of yesterday, we've got about 880 members, which represent around 1.6 million employees across the UK, which is 5% of the UK workforce, which of course stands at around 30 million. But our employer members actually over-deliver in terms of apprenticeships, and they actually, between them, deliver about 10% of UK apprenticeships and 10% of UK grad schemes. So they work together, they share good practice, and events such as these are one of those sort of occasions. This morning's event, as I say, or I said in the preamble, is being recorded, and it will be available on the 5% Club website at around lunchtime tomorrow. And we'll be sharing the slides from those participants who are happy to share those slides with us. We would ask you, as we go through this morning's session, if you've got questions or there's points you want to raise, feel free to put those into chat. And all the way through the session, as speakers bring up pertinent points, we'll also be sharing appropriate links in chat, so do watch out for that. We've got enough time at the end. We've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. And like I say, we've got some fantastic panel members who have got a wealth of experience to draw on to answer those questions. So welcome to the event. And without further ado, we'll kick off. And it's my tremendous pleasure to introduce Emily, who we in the 5% Club work closely with in both her guises, because we're partnered with the St Martin's Group and the Association of Apprentices. And it's an absolute delight to welcome Emily straight from the success of last Friday, which you may allude to. But welcome, Emily, and I'll hand over to you to talk through the issue from the St Martin's Group and maybe the Association of Apprentices perspective. Emily, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Thank you for the lovely welcome. And on the first slide, you actually promoted me to CEO of the St Martin's Group, which I will let the directors know. I'm very delighted to accept. Thank you, but not strictly true. I am a director of the St Martin's Group and also CEO for the Association of Apprentices. And today on this webinar, I bring to you, I suppose, the perspective from the apprentices with regards to building high quality journeys. So as you are thinking about building a high quality journey or tweaking your existing journey, being able to put the apprentice at the heart of it using their perspective is what this session or this sort of next 10 minutes is all about. And sorry, Paul, if you just move on to the next slide. Want to use both the St Martin's Group and the Association for this insight. And it's not only about using the data and insight to consider how you build a programme, so what experiences you're going to give apprentices, how you're going to get them to complete, but also how are you going to get them to achieve the best possible outcome? What can you give them here and now to ensure that actually when they come off their programme, they achieve the best outcome for them? My overriding sort of factor from all of this is that not one size fits all. So when you're looking at the apprentice perspective, certainly there are specific groups that I will call out during this session that you may well require specific interventions for, all backed up by data and by insight from the community that will help you to achieve the high quality learning journey for all of your apprentices. So it's both with a focus on the programme and also on the outcome. Now, from a St Martin's Group perspective, some of you may have seen we did some research last year, and this is what I'll be talking to you mainly about on the outcomes and destinations of apprentices. And it was those who had completed, sorry, Paula, just to stay on the last slide. Thank you. It was looking at the outcomes and destinations of those who had completed their programme and also who hadn't completed their programme. And actually the research is available on the St Martin's Group site. Jill's just shown the link on the chat. When it was launched, it was the largest sample of non-completers surveyed to date. We had over 2,000 apprentices who had completed or withdrawn from their apprenticeship contribute to the research. And what we provided was some really unique detail on the characteristics of non-completers, and for the first time a comparison of what happens to people who complete and who don't afterwards. And all of this is really useful because of course you can build it into your programme to hopefully prevent withdrawals and, as I say, to get to the best possible outcome. So having a look at the outcomes and on to the next slide. The one thing to say here is the research definitely says, and there is a whole host of data that says it is better if an apprentice completes. It's better for them. They have better outcomes. They are more likely to be promoted, more likely to receive a pay rise, more likely to stay with their employer, more likely to use the skills they've gained on their apprenticeship. But also there's much better outcomes for the employer as well. You're more likely to retain them, more likely to fill skills and jobs in your pipeline. So overall, completion is best, although there are some benefits to just participating, but completion is best. But actually, there are some specific groups who don't complete or who are more likely to withdraw. And I'll just call those out because they are worth then remembering as you're creating this learner journey. And of course, you want a consistent journey for everybody, but there are some specific groups that will require some different attention or interventions. And what our research found is that actually those who undertook a higher level programme at 6 or 7, those who changed employer at some point in their programme, those who were older or had a disability or long-term health condition were more likely to withdraw from their apprenticeship. So there's just some immediate groups there as you're thinking about your journey, you may need some interventions. Going back to what I was talking about before in terms of arming them for the best outcomes, even when the apprentices had completed, their outcomes varied. And the most common outcome for all completers was that they stayed with their employer. But they did vary the outcomes depending on the type of person they were. So those who undertook a level 2 apprenticeship, who hadn't already worked for their employer before they joined, so new joiners, younger respondents, those with disabilities or health conditions, those from deprived areas, low socioeconomic areas, they were all less likely to secure an outcome with the same employer. So these again are groups. It's not just those who don't complete, but actually if you want people to have the best possible outcome, these are all groups that as you think about creating that really high quality journey, there should be interventions or support mechanisms in place to get that to that position. Just move on to the next slide. The research also showed reasons for leaving, and you can see here a whole host of reasons. Again, that's the main observation from all of this, is there's no one main reason. What we found is that there are a number of things that contribute to withdrawals, but when respondents were asked to name a single reason, the biggest single reason was lack of support from their employer. And that tended to be lack of support with time off the job, with study support, with support networks and mentors, etc. And again, there were some specific groups that called out types of support that would be useful. So at level 2, they were more likely to say there was a lack of support. If they were new to you, so new hires rather than your existing colleagues on apprenticeships, they were more likely to call out that they needed pastoral care or more practical support. Younger apprentices in particular were more likely to call out that they needed support on, I suppose, less negative things like bullying and harassment in the workplace, or how to find their way around the workplace, all these things. Whereas over 50s, who were more likely to leave, needed for more targeted interventions. So there are some nuances to reasons for withdrawing, but as I say, really important to be looking at those specific groups and highlighting the need for particular support. Just move on to the next slide. this support and the sort of journey you create needs to go right to the beginning, because actually, and it'll be no surprise to you, that all of the evidence points to the fact that withdrawals happen because expectations are not met. So if a mismatch around expectations happens, you're more likely to withdraw from your apprenticeship. And because you are making a significant investment, it's worth bringing that forward to the very start of the journey to make sure at selection stage, whether it be an existing apprentice or a new hire, that is built into your selection and recruitment process if you want to get the best possible return for yourself and for the apprentice as well. The research, if you move on to the next slide, also shows the most useful support. This is from completers, and you'll see here on the screen the most useful support, or completers said the most useful support is when the training provider and employer really work together to give them what they need. But if you move on to the next slide, you can see that from the non-completers, the factors that would have helped them to stay actually correlate. So at the top, more support from employers with off-the-job training and study support, more support from the training provider. And in fact, of the top three, and where it's, from an association perspective, good to see, is more support from support networks. That's not just peer groups, but it's also mentors at work, would have prevented people from not withdrawing. Worth saying at this point that this was done before the cost of living crisis. I guess if you run this again, you will definitely see some different results, but financial support at the time this was done was not the biggest factor. Having said that, younger apprentices and those who are new hires to employers did call out financial support. So there's obviously an element of that you'd want to build into programmes as well. So that's a very whistle-stop tour in terms of the research that St Martin's Group did. It's very difficult to fit into 10 minutes, but as I say, you can read it on the system. But I just wanted to give you a bit of insight as to what apprentices said and how that could help you to create your learner journey. And as I say, not one size fits all. Apprentices are individual, and there are specific groups that require support along the way. Just to bring that to life from an association perspective, on the next slide, I have included, and these will be absolutely available afterwards, some of the things that our apprentices tell us in the community that resonate with the St Martin's Group research. And, fundamentally, everybody that we speak to just wants to get on. They simply want to progress, get ahead, be more employable, improve their progression opportunities, but they absolutely need support, your support with their workload. They often talk about this balance and feeling guilt between doing their apprenticeship and doing their job, and that shouldn't be the case. They need support with time management and actually some training on how to manage that. And very much they want to be aware of your value, the value you place at the end of the programme. They want to start with the end in mind. What does that actually mean for them at the end? Where are they going to go? They express low confidence in career planning and career advancement. So this is a really important part of the programme right from the very beginning, to be building that picture about what is going to happen to them at the end and making sure they've got the support to realise that. So I'm at time now, but there are some contact details from the St Martin's Group on the slide, and I'm going to hand back to Mark and await any questions towards the end of the session. Thank you, Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emily. And we've already got a couple of questions from Sarah and Francesca in chat. So please keep those questions coming, and I've acknowledged those, both Sarah and Francesca, and we'll come back to those. But Emily's got a wealth of experience here from the St Martin's Group research that was published last year. And, there's a lot of different nuances in there based on the level of the apprenticeship, or indeed the demographic of the apprentice. And I think Emily drew out a couple of points, but some really good points made there in chat, and we'll come back to those. And also from an association perspective, I know that the association is growing, and it was fabulous to see the Guildhall reception in London last week, 300 apprentices networking, getting together. And I think, it's great to see as they transition into the workplace. We forget sometimes it's a new experience, work, let alone doing an apprenticeship, and it can be quite a challenge. So I think you brought that to life brilliantly, Emily, and no doubt there will be a significant number of questions later, and we'll circle back to those. I do note that since we've started this, we've grown by about 7 or 8 participants, and Jill has put in chat, for those of you who've joined us slightly later, that there is a recording, so you haven't missed anything. There's a chance to catch up tomorrow when it's posted on the website. So thank you very much, Emily. What I'd now like to do is move across to our partner for this event, City and Guilds, and we're delighted to have both Rebecca and Jamie, the Hollandby and Holland show, which will be fantastic. And this is about the endpoint assessment. And I know there was discussion from Emily there about qualifications, meaningful qualifications. But it'd be great now to go over to Jamie and Rebecca to explore the rationale and the best ways to get to that endpoint assessment success. So Rebecca and Jamie, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you for everybody on the call for inviting us on to your webinar this morning. Next slide, please. So City and Guilds have been working with endpoint assessment now for the last 5 to 6 years. And earlier this year, we certified our 50,000th endpoint assessment learner. So a key milestone for us as an endpoint assessment organisation. And we've learnt an incredible amount along that journey as well. And one of the key things that we'll say, and it echoes very much what Emily says earlier on this morning, is the learner needs to start with the endpoint assessment in mind. They really need to understand what the expectations of their EPA will be, how they're going to get there, what milestones have they got to achieve to get endpoint assessment, and what the endpoint assessment means to them and their future employment. Having really open and honest conversations from the very start will help build trust and confidence in what that learner knows they have to achieve to hit their EPA. Communication is key here, and that's not just between the learner and their employer, but it's also about the training provider having open communication, and particularly the employer and the training provider reaching out to their chosen endpoint assessment organisation as well. Understand the requirements early doors, consider things such as where the endpoint assessment is going to be held, if any materials or specific requirements that need to be built or planned for. The sooner you start having those conversations, the better for the success and the achievement of that learner. We really also promote the learner having a really positive awareness of what their apprenticeship requires. Now, that might be what their on-programme journey is. So that might be a qualification that is mandated by the standard that they're working on. It may be a qualification that is put into their delivery, but it also includes making sure they know the simple things such as functional skills. It's mandated within our standards. Does the learner have their functional skills achieved? Is it something they've got to work to as well? Have they got the evidence to say they have any exemptions for it? It's the simple things at the very start of that planning process that will make a seamless journey to endpoint assessment. And what all the stats show is the more open and honest and the more careful planning you put into those inductions and planning for those certain milestones, the better success rate the learner will have when it comes to engagement and completion of their EPA. If I can have the next slide, please. So why do we encourage so much engagement? It makes the learner feel comfortable and calm about the expectations of endpoint assessment. As many of you will know, endpoint assessment looks very different to every standard that all your learners might possibly go on to work through. The learner needs to know what their expectations of assessment are. Most assessment plans will incorporate a knowledge test of some aspect, an interview or professional discussion of some kind, and it might be an observation in their workplace or an observation of that learner working through their individual day-to-day activities. The sooner the learner knows what their endpoint assessment entails, the more that the employer and the provider can plan for those aspects. The more that you can plan in milestones or mini knowledge tests or mini formative assessment processes so that the learner feels comfortable of what is coming ahead. We really do advocate working with your chosen endpoint assessment organisation to get as many exemplar materials as possible. Here at City and Guilds, we have example knowledge test, example portfolio guidance, examples on the types of questions the learner will be asked by the IEPA in their endpoint assessment. It's so important that the learner feels comfortable and ready for their EPA. So do reach out to the endpoint assessment organisation. They will have a host of materials there waiting for you to support that learner's journey. Similar to that, sharing templates. Each awarding organisation will be different, but the more that you're working with your required EPO templates early on, it makes sure that you've got the evidence in the right format ready for the AU to plan for that learner's endpoint assessment. And I'm now going to pass you on to Jamie.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, firstly, good morning to everyone. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity, obviously, to talk about our EPA. As Rebecca's pointed out, we completed 50,000 EPA certificated, I think March it was this year. And we're confident that'll probably likely be 60,000 by the end of the summer. So I won't talk verbatim around some of the points that are on that slide there, but 5 things that I always think about with the apprentices that we've given, and we're going to come on to some stats in a bit, is, as Rebecca's touched on, is actually identifying all of the things that your EPAO can offer you is one of the things that I would really implore employers to be part of that conversation. So it's yes, this is in a post-gateway sense, but actually in reality, these conversations can be happening earlier. So evidence points to that greater synergy and ownership between the apprentice, the employer and the provider really gets positive results. Rebecca's touched on it again, all the things that are mentioned on that slide, but actually encouraging the apprentice themselves to take ownership of their EPA. Where we see sometimes fall over in terms of grades or failures is actually the apprentice not understanding it, and it is their EPA ultimately. So really, as an employer, encouraging them to take ownership is a key thing. I think we're saying it really loud and clear, mock on the slides, but again, providing the apprentice opportunities to practice the skills. We couldn't emphasise enough an apprentice taking a practice EPA, if that's, I appreciate that, sometimes hard, but if a provider and employer can facilitate that, again, it points to the positive outcomes of that, good, strong providers and good supportive employers are doing that. Third point, I would really, again, and it comes along with the encouragement, the support, but actually it's a period of stress, and it was interesting in Emily's work earlier. So actually helping the apprentice to manage their workload in the readiness of getting ready post-gateway, it's a significant milestone in their learning. So actually helping them manage their stress and their workload, that would be perfect. And then the final point for me before moving on to the next slide would be actually be aware of the actual apprentices' individual needs. We sometimes see again where apprentices they have some kind of learning plan in place and that hasn't been shared with the EPA. So being aware of what that may entail for the apprentice when they come to EPA would be really significant, that I would just again highlight. And can you move us on to the next slide, please? But we touched on this earlier on, and we've just taken a real snapshot here. We're all very aware. So on the left, you've got these are SSA areas, sector skills areas, and it was broadly about 50% the completion rate last year across all sector areas. And I think we're all striving to, hugely increase that. Evidence suggests it will increase this year. I'm not sure it's going to hit the target that the DfE have set, but, it could be 5%, perhaps more, or maybe 7%. So you can see there's a broad broad stretch around, ranging from, high 40s to, lower part of the 60s. But what we did, we looked at a snapshot of the actually attendees, and we just wanted to draw you in detail to this. Is you can see that this is just example of engineering, and these are standards that C&G are in here, and you can see there's such a breadth of standards where the range is huge in terms of completion rates. You have some real low ones, but yet equally there's some in the 70 plus, so hugely above the 50% kind of average. So one thing we would implore is for employers to actually understand the success rates relative to their standard, and they will obviously do that by talking to training providers, because these are the hidden things. So we all look at the headline figure, but actually be aware of the standard specific completion rates, because again, I think that can lead you to put in additional planning, resource, time, conversations with EPAO. And I know Jacqueline will talk about how good BAE's success rates are later on, but it was just to give you guys a bit of a flavour of one particular area. You can drill down into any area of the ones on the left. And I think that's us now. So I'm handing back over to Mark.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Jamie. And I think there's some real parallels there in terms of what Emily was describing in terms of supporting the apprentice on their journey. And that support differs across the whole of that journey, depending on the course you're on or the demographics. And of course, the whole point with the endpoint assessment is, it's an exam, or is it an exam, or it's an unknown. And I really like the idea of mock, because, let's face it, we all like going into an assessment when we've got a rough idea what it'll construe. Better if you know the questions, but clearly that will be great. And I think some great advice in there. And certainly we've got some great questions coming in around the plan and some of the lessons from higher education that can be learned, and we'll come back to those. But now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Dr Jacqueline Hall from BAE Systems. Why is it a great pleasure? Well, my son works for BAE Systems. Jacqueline didn't know that, but he works up in Barrow-in-Furness, and I know that that there's a great system up there. There's a huge amount of support provided to apprentices and graduates. So I won't steal any of Jacqueline's thunder. I'm looking very much forward to the case study, Jacqueline. So over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to keep things very short and to the point. I'm going to start with creating some colour in your mind by showing you a video of what an apprenticeship at BAE Systems looks like. Thank you. And I hope that just gives a little bit of colour about what it's like being a BAE Systems apprenticeship. It's really important to say, first of all, that STEM skills are hard to recruit to, and we need suitably qualified, expert people to do the job that they have trained for. It's integral to our business strategy, to our safety culture. It's integral to our future and the products, the creativity and the imagination. So apprentices and apprenticeships are absolutely fundamental, almost part of our DNA, for want of a better word. So if you'd like to move to the next slide. Thank you. I just want to again, it looks brilliant to say that we have, if you look at the last 3 years for apprenticeship success, 96, 97, 95, and that's also through the period of COVID where we didn't furlough any apprentices because they were critical to our workforce and to our productivity. We also had last year around 30% of our intake being female, and also being female in non-traditional trades, such as those that the colleagues City and Guilds, electrical fitter, mechanical fitter, fabricators, powder coaters on submarines, as well as product design and development, project management, finance. So a whole sort of plethora of different standards. So what is the recipe to success? Well, again, picking up on what Emily was saying about receiving a qualification, employability and getting ahead, completely agree with Emily on that, because we don't recruit to an apprenticeship, we recruit for a career path. And there's a subtle but very important difference. This is all about a talent pipeline and also about people feeling that they're going somewhere. And it's also worth saying that 3 years post-apprenticeship, 90%, over 90% of that intake are still with us as permanent employees and will progress and potentially go on to future apprenticeships or to upskill and to reskill. So going back to the beginning, this whole picture, as you can see, we received over 13,000 applications this year, and that involves a lot of careful sifting. And that's not that we cream off the top 10% or anything like that, because very often we take people who maybe haven't had the best start in life, particularly with their education and training, and they may have had very difficult personal circumstances to overcome as well. And what an apprenticeship at BAE does is give people a life chance to have a really purposeful and really satisfying job and feel that they're going somewhere. So that notion of progression and career plan is very important. We also look very critically at the beginning. Colleagues were saying at City and Guilds about start with the end point in mind. Absolutely concur with that. And also we look to recruit people in terms of their behaviours and attitudes and how they will fit within the culture of the organisation. We like to empower our apprentices. We have a National Apprentice Council. They actually have just finished leading on the development of an EPA crib sheet that they can sort of share with people who are preparing and approaching Gateway and thinking about those things. But it's always somebody like me who says you need to do this or take a mock test or do all these things. I'm a bit kind of old, but if you hear that from your peer, you might just sort of think, oh yeah, if that's what they say, that's what I'll do. Next slide, please. And going back to right at the beginning, it's also about the fact that we all have a responsibility on this call to encourage people into engineering and manufacturing and other associated apprenticeships that support those activities. So we've got to we start young, getting people excited and interested in STEM, providing work experience, and then beginning to expose them to the sort of potential of being an apprentice at BAE. The recruitment process, where we look very carefully through using gamification, because we have so many applicants. It's not just about the qualifications and GCSEs or A-levels, but it's about those individual attributes and aspirations that people bring. So we use game technology to do that. Then ultimately that sifts down to face-to-face or virtual interviews. And for those that are not successful, we also give feedback, because it's important that they can learn from this experience and then move on and be successful with another application elsewhere. We do a lot around EPA prep. We do a lot about that thinking and preparing and feeling that they can give the very best of themselves during that EPA process. In effect, it's confirming that whole learning journey. But then those individuals will become the role models to inspire those to try that little bit harder and to push that little bit further. Anecdotally, through COVID, I had the pleasure of judging an award. We have internal awards for and celebration of success. And one young lady, she powder coats submarines, but she had COVID and couldn't walk 200 meters, but she inspired her peers, and she continued to try so hard, and we were delighted that she came out with a distinction. We have other apprentices who maybe have had a really difficult time at the start and have gone on through BAE and progressed into their careers, and now have become managers and supervisors themselves. And in fact, one individual is himself taking 12 apprentices within his part of the business this year. So it's a little like the circle of life. It's hard work. Colleagues talked about pastoral support and support for apprentices. Emily in particular picked up on that about withdrawal. And we have extensive support both online, but also through our skills coaches, who do provide that lifeline to enable our apprentices to give the very best of themselves. So beneath the waterline is hard work. There is no other way to describe. It is relentless hard work, but we are really proud of our apprentices. We're proud of the creativity and the imagination. And when I'm in their company, I'm always humbled because they really are amazing apprentices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. That's a really insightful insight, if that's a thing, but into the apprenticeship programme and BAE, and a 95% completion rate, given all the challenges that Emily described earlier around why people drop out. You know, clearly there's something quite special that you do that helps that. And I'm really taken by the idea of not recruited to an apprenticeship, but recruited to a career pathway. That's really insightful, and it does play to a number of the questions that we've been asked. So my colleague Jill will be the voice from above in a moment and come in with some questions, but I'll start with one to you, Jacqueline, about recruit to a pathway and a career pathway. I joined the Royal Navy at 16 as an apprentice. I was so fixated on doing my O-levels at the time. I just joined the Navy. I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into, what career pathway I was on. And therefore, do you see a difference between those that are new to work versus those that are experienced to work and get a career pathway? And on that career pathway discussion, you know, where does the careers advice come in? Because if people are recruited to a career pathway and they get onto it and they think, oh, I'm on the wrong pathway, does that contribute to the dropout rate? So really, you know, how do you recruit to the career pathway and make sure they're on that right route?
Well, again, it goes back into that very early intervention before they even go anywhere near an application. It's about raising awareness, but also our website and how we funnel people into sort of applying for an apprenticeship. They kind of go in with their eyes wide open. So it's also maybe through STEM ambassadors. An apprentice, we often encourage our apprentices. We have over 1,000 STEM ambassadors. They go back into the schools that they work, you know, they themselves were at. So again, those young people can see, oh, you know, John Smith did X and look at him now as a BAE apprentice. So that's quite important to give that exposure. So when they do come to apply for an apprenticeship, that we encourage them to apply for no more than 2, because it would just get overly complicated. But it also that they start to think about that choice that they're making, and that will be explored further even through the face-to-face interviews or the virtual interviews that take place. So they know the occupation, if it be electrical fitting or be product design and development or project management, they understand the occupation that they are entering. Now, if you go at the other extreme, people who are returning to work, we've done a very sort of successful Women into Engineering, also Movement to Work as well. We're a founding member of Movement to Work. But again, we're bringing people who maybe have had a very low level or a poor education experience. They may have children, they may have other responsibilities as well. So again, giving them a taste kind of really breaks down those myths and the sort of perception of what engineering is. and is not. And again, that enables them to make a very informed choice. By making an informed choice and being excited about that choice, we're much more likely to retain them. And that also contributes to the fact, you know, our stats are so very high. Where we do lose an occasional apprentice, it's probably, you know, through very extenuating circumstances and usually very unusual circumstances.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Emily, have you got any points to sort of add from either the St Martin's Group research or from the experience of the AOA?
I think everything Jacqueline's just described, I wholeheartedly agree with. You know, in the research, it showed that a contributory factor to withdrawals was the mismanagement of expectations. And I mean, this is a very extreme story, Mark, but I heard it around an individual who'd chosen to go into social care and health and social care, and on day one had been asked to go into sort of a palliative care environment, which would be shocking for anybody. But, you know, on day one, that's a big ask. If that person potentially had known that up front or had been given that during the recruitment selection process, etc., it may be different. But there's absolutely something in the recruitment and selection of existing colleagues going on to apprenticeships and new joiners where that management of expectation needs to be set. And I think what Jacqueline's described is why they've got very high retention rates amongst many things, I'm sure, but it's actually knowing what you're getting into. So I keep coming back to this, start with the end in mind. Our apprentices tell us all the time that keeps them motivated to know what is going to be at the end of that, whether that be another job, whether it be more responsibility. Just the employer just placing value on the fact that they're going to have these skills and have a career path, I think is a big deal. So that's what I would add to both from the research, Mark, and also from what apprentices at the AOA tell us as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Emily. And Ian Mellier, you've asked a huge amount of questions in the chat, so thank you. But one of your questions was around right from the outset to have a plan, and I think the the resounding answer to that is, you know, taking Jacqueline's point about a plan, a pathway, manage people's expectations through that pathway, and avoid that extreme shock of capture that Emily just described with that extreme example, so that people, you know, are going to stick with it if they know. So hopefully that's answered a number of the questions you've posed in and around a plan. I'll now defer to Jill, who's been looking at the questions to see which question we go to next. Jill, over to you.
Well, I'll take them sequentially, and I do notice someone's got their hand raised as well. So, Richard, I'll come to you when I've got through the chat questions. Sarah McCormack asked during Emily's session, does any of the research identify any themes or differences regarding employer providers?
It didn't actually, Sarah. No, it did look at the experiences of apprentices with regards to different types of providers, but it didn't call out employer providers specifically. And not to anyone on the call to worry, but colleges actually came out, the people leaving who were at colleges cited slightly worse experiences with progression and the, I suppose, the organisation of the course. But actually that directly correlated with the fact that a lot of respondents in colleges are younger, and they were more likely to state that as an objective. But that's the only thing that was in comparison to independent training providers and employer providers and universities as well. But that was the only thing that came out. There was no statistically significant difference for employer providers.
Great, thank you, Emily.
Thanks. Just on that one, on employment providers though, Jill, is it just going over to the endpoint assessment side? Is there any comment from the team at City and Guilds who see it from an endpoint assessment perspective?
I think we probably confirm with what Emily said in terms of a vast majority of EPI within C&G is provider-led, but we still obviously work with a lot of colleges naturally. And I think where sometimes it might fall down within colleges. Colleges obviously offer a huge amount of provision, be that, you know, learn responsive, full-time adult education, and EPA hasn't always been planned out as thoroughly. But it's difficult to put an actual, you know, percent towards it. But yeah, I would suggest providers perform more strongly than colleges, and I would suggest again equally employer providers probably perform stronger as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jamie. Jill.
So Francesca Ridley says, I think this may be during Emily's presentation as well, regarding apprentices with disabilities that dropped out before the end of their apprenticeship, is there research into why? Clearly, Emily, people are very keen you do a lot more research.
Keep us in business. Yeah, absolutely. It said that apprentices with disabilities and long-term health conditions were more likely to cite lack of support for that particular condition than anything else as a reason for leaving. So that was their sort of top reason, and that was both from their provider and from their employers. So clearly they felt that there was some more support that could have contributed to them staying. That was the main thing that came out from the research.
Thanks, Emily.
Possibly lack of understanding or something, Mark. You know.
So I'll just come in from a 5% club perspective, in that we've done our own research through the audit process over a number of years now, and what we do find is there's a lack of information on SEND and disabilities in many employers' systems, i.e. they don't really know that much about obviously the visible disabilities, but the neurodiverse aspects of that. Jacqueline, you employ a lot of engineers. And neurodiversity and engineering, I am a former engineer, they tend to go a bit hand in hand. How do you manage that and accommodate disability and neurodiversity?
We have around 15% of our intake have an inclusive learning need. I'll give you an example. This year, we have 2 profoundly deaf learners who are following an engineering pathway at the moment, and we have signers who work alongside them. So they have a skills coach, they also have their signers, so whether they're on the job, off the job, they have that level of support that Emily's referring to.
Brilliant, thank you, Jacqueline. Jill,
Mark, can I just add on something from an endpoint assessment?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, if that's okay. As an endpoint assessment organisation, we will work with as much support as we can, and will offer as much support as we can to learners that do have additional needs that will require changes to assessment plans or the way assessment is run to support their learners through endpoint assessment. The biggest thing I can say here is reach out early to your endpoint assessment organisation to talk through what could be considered, and if it needs be, we can reach out to our EQA bodies as well and Ofwat to see how we can support. So the door's never shut, but we just need to start conversations early.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And I'll draw on some of my own experience from the Royal Navy and military training. What we found, and it's very diverse, people from lots of diverse social backgrounds, but quite a lot of the learners come into the workplace with undiagnosed neurodiversity issues, which explains why they've struggled in education to that point. And actually, once it's diagnosed and the appropriate support comes into play, bang, the light goes on, and they're absolutely fantastic, as we'd expect. So there is an issue in around that, and it's great to hear some good examples of how that supports people through the whole process. I'll defer back to Jill to see what other questions we've got.
I think, as you mentioned, Amelia, thank you, Ian, you posted several questions. We may have touched on this already, but I'll read it. So would it make sense for the employer to identify a complete plan of apprenticeship, which includes expectations and opportunities after the apprenticeship finishes?
So I think we answered that in that recruit to a career pathway, and give people the approach all the way through, and that's why I sort of referred to Ian's question there. So hopefully that answered it, Ian, which is, it's not about the next step, it's about the whole journey and, what support you can provide. I think you had some other good points though, and I'll go to Jamie on this one around EPA and, the mock, but actually what can you do and how far can you push the envelope and what people are aware of? Because Ian asked a question around, videos, greater, all sorts of different media to help people understand what an EPA is, because it does sound a bit daunting if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective as C&G, we offer a hell of a lot of mock resources. I think I looked down in the chat as well. There was a question around sample papers. Well, when we provide our EPA, then naturally, we provide an example of sample papers. Video is an interesting concept. We haven't as such explored that, and there's always a kind of fine line between revealing too much of what the EPA may look like. But we do use video content in an instruction sense in terms of So say, for instance, in construction standards, how bays would be set up and what to expect on the day, and conversations that, you know, flow that way. So it's not something we've done, but that's not to say we could, you know, we couldn't explore that. You know, it would be very standard specific. So it might be something we can pick up with Ian separately outside of this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. Jill, back to you.
But the Johnny's asked this one, Johnny Gurr, who I think is potentially from a university. Johnny says, I see lots of overlap in findings in the St Martin's Group report and experience of students on undergraduate and postgraduate degree programmes at university. It would be interesting to see how widening participation and social mobility action support groups within higher education setting could support the development of recruitment, retention and experience for apprenticeships. At the moment, at degree apprenticeship level, it doesn't seem to be quite joined up. There's quite a lot in that question there.
Yeah, so I think you know, I'll sort of sow the seed in that, you know, what we see from the 5% club, because we look at graduates and apprentice. Graduate recruitment is far more diverse as you'd expect, because the university encourages the diversity at university, and it's a national activity. Apprenticeships generally are local, and therefore there's an absence of diversity. But of course, universities, because they appeal to a diverse cohort, really have got the mechanisms in place to support that and help the participation. Jacqueline, you're a national employer, so in many respects mirror a university in terms of, you know, the nature of the employees you get coming through. Have you got any advice for those you see in your supply chain or smaller employers for whom some of these really, you know, really sensible solutions could be quite a challenge because of scale? You know, do you see what you do? How would that roll down into a smaller organisation?
Well, I think it's fair to say about a third of our intake. So looking at our current intake, we have over 3,000 apprentices on programme. A third of those will be degree apprentices. In September, we'll start another 1,400 apprentices, of which a third will be degree apprentices. It's all about the partnership and the collaboration with the training provider or the university. And it's also about ensuring the standard itself is fit for purpose and the EPA is appropriate and proportionate to judge whether people can actually do the job that they train for. I think it's difficult because many smaller organisations are really pushed for time. Some of them in their business are just trying to keep their business alive, particularly when you're thinking about the cost of living. But that's where we would see ourselves as having a kind of stewardship role, so that we would advocate on behalf of those employers that were within the supply chain to try and ensure that all the building blocks are basically in place. But I would encourage them to build that relationship with their local university or local education provider.
Brilliant, thanks, Jacqueline. And I'll allow Emily to have a shameless plug for the AOA, because obviously on a university campus, there's National Union of Students, there's a great student body. Many apprentices, particularly in smaller organisations, are on their own. And is there a role for third parties such as AOA to help, you know, to deliver the kind of things Johnny suggests?
Yeah, definitely, because actually, I mean, I'm an SME, the AOA is an SME, St Martin's Group's an SME. You don't have the time and resource often to put in the pastoral care and supporting networks that the apprentices are asking for, but you are more likely to leave an apprenticeship if you are doing an apprenticeship with an SME. So there's definitely a gap there. And the AOA does that. It sort of joins those apprentices from SMEs in local areas or online to make sure they can access some of those supporting groups. And universities actually are coming on board as partners for the AOA. So we've onboarded sort of 5 universities now who are getting an understanding that actually, whilst they're very good at the academic, very good at the university sort of curriculum, actually the nuts and bolts of apprenticeships, the things where apprentice peers need to talk to each other, it isn't available. So universities are working with the AOA to plug that gap mark as well. Brilliant.
Thanks, Emily. Jill, back to you.
Oh, sorry, my mic went on. I've also got a couple. I'm going to put these together. There's because we've got 4 minutes left. Someone Francesca says, was salary a factor in dropout rate? So there's a salary question, and there's two more which I think are more directed to BAE. But Sarah says, I'd love to know what resourcing you have internally to recruit and support apprentices, Jacqueline, and how this has grown over time. Do you have a specific apprenticeship team, or are they part of a wider HR L&D? And someone also asks, how much time out of work do you give your STEM ambassadors to STEM events? So salary, what resources have you got, Jacqueline? Is it a wider team or specific emerging talent recruitment team, and the STEM ambassadors time factor?
So as we have early careers shared services, and within that there is a recruitment team, but we're part of a total team, if you like, in terms of talent. We all have our role to play, and in terms of that process, you know, it's an intense process, and I think one of the things that we really do need to think about and are currently thinking about is how those apprentices who maybe are not successful, how we can, if you like, filter them through into the supply chain. Somebody I can see on the chat asked about whether we do everything in-house or with different colleges. We do have subcontractors for things which are, if you like, very specialist. You know, if you look at the underpinning knowledge for a nuclear scientist, for example, we would look to a university partner to be part of that delivery. But we also do delivery in-house too, because there are certain rules around subcontracting.
Brilliant, thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you to Richard for fessing up to the fact that the raised hand was an accident. So we don't have to find that. Thanks, Richard. And I do note there's a couple of very specific questions in chat that we'll actually pose directly to panelists and perhaps take online. So Shana, your note to Jacqueline, and Basasa, your note to City and Guilds. You know, they're quite specific questions, and we'll pass those offline. I do note the time is now 12:28, and you know, time rushes by on these things. And I note that, you know, about 50 of you have persevered all the way through. A few did drop off at 12, clearly a lunch break at that point. But thank you for persevering. And we do have a number of comments in chat where people have dropped off. So really, I'd just like, you know, on behalf of all attendees, to thank our panelists for quite exceptional insights. You know, thank you, Emily, from both St Martin's Group and AOA. Thank you to Jamie and Rebecca from an endpoint assessment perspective. And Jacqueline, thank you so much for a brilliant video and also sharing the insights from BAE Systems. Fabulous and great to see such a fantastic achievement rate. So on behalf of the 5% Club, thank you so much to everybody for attending. As Jill said in the chat as we started, a recording of this event will go on our website tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we'll also share the slides. So for colleagues who had to drop off, or if you wish to share the experience with others, please point them in that direction. And it's great to work in partnership with City and Guilds on this activity. We've got a strong relationship, and that's fabulous, and great again to work with colleagues from BAE and the St Martin's Group / AOA, who we've got a very strong relationship. So at 12:30, it's my cue to stop waffling. So thank you all so much for attending, and hope to see you at our next event. Thank you very much.